Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Free Speech Forward podcast. Today, we have a guest who has, I think, my favorite name of everybody we've had so far on the show. This is Carob Marcelle Bartholomew. I love the name Carob. You were just telling us offline about even the significance of that name, and I think it's going to be really pertinent to who you are, the story you share, and what we talk about today. But I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, co-founder, Chris, to introduce you to Carob, and we will get this conversation started this morning.
Great. Thanks, Joy. And thanks, Carob, for joining us. How are you?
Great. Thank you.
For all of our audience out there, if you are not familiar with Carob, we'll just give you some background on her illustrious background. Carob is a strong parental advocate who has been sounding the alarm about critical race theory and other ideological practices permeating our education system. Her advocacy took her to run and become a Republican nominee for Utah State School Board, and she recently accepted a position of Utah State Director for Moms for America, where she uses that position to bring awareness to the harm of so-called, quote, liberated education policies. So we haven't had a guest with your background yet on our show, so really excited to hear more. But why don't we start off where we usually do, which is letting you tell us a little bit about your origin story and how you came to being an advocate for free speech ideas.
Sure. I laugh at the haven't had the background because usually I'm thinking, you mean you haven't had a Republican, and I hate that. I hate the term Republican because honestly, I see a massively big uniparty. But I am conservative. I do have conservative values. I'd like to protect my country and not have it fall to socialism. Sorry,
Yeah.
said you're in New York.
Yeah, sad.
So, yeah, my background is I was in Seattle in 2020 when everything went completely awry. And I had a woman punch me in the face and kick me in the crotch because I held a sign that said, "Character matters, reject CRT. They are using us."
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And
So you were
oh,
assaulted
and
by
at that moment, yes, and I'm sorry to be vulgar. It's early morning. My filter's not on yet.
no,
But
we prefer unfiltered. The more the
I was say,
better.
those are the best free speech conversations.
Yeah.
so, and the thing is the girl looked so much like me, she could have been a relative. Um, and so at that moment, I realized it wasn't what people thought it was. It wasn't about defending all minorities or making sure all minorities had a voice. It was making sure that a certain narrative was taught. And as my husband at that point was running for a representative position, um, we would go to different, the street, not protests, just sign wavings, right? Um, and at one of them, a set of young people marched up, and I mean frog march as in a caricature of some World War II movie. Frog marched over, and they had their F this, F that kind of signs. And I tried to talk to them, and they said in unison, "We will not engage as we can tell you will not agree." And I was very shocked by that. I had my 12-year-old with me at that time. He was 12, and he said, "Mom, they're like the brown shirts." And I said, "Yes," and they
Yeah.
didn't know. And he walked up to them and told them that because he's that kind of kid. And so he walked up to them and he said, "You're behaving like the brown shirts." And they were like, "We don't even know what that is."
Wow.
So
Not surprising.
at that moment, I began to get very concerned about education.
Mm,
My background is I grew up and aged out of the foster system. So I'm very much autodidactic, and which means self-taught. And so the idea of teaching people because of the color of their skin at that point, now it's of course gender, but teaching people that they are victims solely because of the color of their skin did not sit well with me.
right. Well, your life clearly is a living refutation of that premise, right? So, for the record,
Right.
I was not alluding to that we haven't had Republicans or conservatives on our show. It was more kind of fighting from a parent's perspective
Okay.
the kind of
Right.
education CRT front, and really, I think identifying it that as an ideology that is permeating education and wanting to push back against it from a parent's perspective. We've had educators on who've given us that
Okay, sure.
perspective, or legal activists and lawyers who have been on that fight, but no parents yet. So that was more the reference there.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm going to be really curious to hear more about your thoughts about education, especially since it sounds like you had a 12-year-old who at age 12 could educate some fully grown adults who perhaps should have been more educated than a 12-year-old. So I'm really curious to hear more about, I guess, what you did to educate, and maybe how you think about it even now going forward, and maybe to really connect this to free speech. Is this something that you explicitly advocate for? Is it there just sort of implicitly in how you live your life? Like what would you say if it was your son or another 12-year-old student as to why free speech matters and we should not be like the brown shirts and we should know who the brown shirts are and why it's a problem?
Sure. So my son started reading before he entered school. And by the time he was in fifth grade and things started to go a little bit crazy, he came to me and he goes, Mom, the parallels between this and Animal Farm are uncanny. So that's the kid I've raised.
Wow. If he was referencing Animal Farm
And-
as a fifth grader, that's already well in advance of most of them.
right. In 1984, like this is a child who, when you walk into his room back then, you'd find 1984 under his bed. So he's very, very well read. I've not read 1984 because I believe that's the one with the rats, and no, thank you. But we have regular conversations. Now that he's 17, I can't believe I'm saying that, but now that he's 17, those conversations oftentimes cut off because he's got his earbuds in. But if people are watching rather than hearing the audio, I have a big smile because I actually teach. So
Mm,
I teach in the homeschool world because there's a necessity, and I have 83 students this year. So it's an interesting way of saying homeschool, but again, because it's a necessity. In I live in Utah, where um last year, last last spring, or maybe the spring before, I can't remember now, there was a massively viral situation where a bunch of kids protested furries in their schools.
okay.
So it went extremely viral because people were saying, why are the kids standing up and the parents not? Why aren't the schools standing up,
Yeah.
etc.? Okay, I was blamed for what happened there, and I shouldn't have been. And also, I do have a part to play. And the part I have to play is a bunch of parents came to me and said, "Hey, you are running for office. Can you tell us why the discipline is so bad in our schools?" And I said, I can, but I'm going to record it on Zoom because you know, in this day and age, people spin words. So I said, I'll record it on Zoom and I'll explain to you what's happening. What's happening is that your children are being taught to center around the marginalized. And to center around the marginalized means that some people must be excluded. So while some children, and I did see the video, some children are allowed to run around the floor on all fours, bark like dogs, bite, and even spray axe spray into people's faces and call it human repellent. Your kids are being taught to be kind, which means to self censor.
Yeah.
They're not supposed to react to anything. And then they said, what do we do? And I said, and this is where I back out because I am running for office. And I said, the one thing I will tell you is that in the 1960s, a Black school was really frustrated that they didn't have good curriculum. They couldn't get new curriculum. And so their kids didn't come to school for, a couple of weeks. Like every Thursday, they didn't come to school. They called it a blackout. And when they didn't come to school, things changed. So they decided that they would protest. I didn't think they should protest because I don't think children should ever be on the front lines of this battle.
Mm,
It's so funny because people will say, oh, Utah, and I guess this is where it can go. People will say, oh, Utah's a safe place. Utah's full of the nicest people. Well, Charlie Kirk was shot 3 weeks ago, right? So we are not the most tolerant people. We brand tolerance as telling people from the pulpits to shut your mouths in order to be
Mhm.
kind.
Yeah.
And it is I'll tell you, I find it a scary place to be. It is honestly a scary place, especially as one of the few minorities. I know I have natural lighting, but but I am half black. And in Utah that means I'm black fully.
Right.
And that bothers me
Yeah.
because I'm very literal in certain things. My son will say, "Mom, you're a very emotional person." Okay, well, I'm also feminine. I'm also a girl, but but I am um there's two sides to the apple, right? And so Utah has what I would call safety culture. We have signs everywhere that say, let me hold your gun until you feel safe. And nobody understands that a person who's having a bad day driving down the road might be listening to music and see a giant billboard that basically alludes to suicide. That might do something to them, right? So the class I teach today on Mondays is teaching analytical thinking to high schoolers.
Mm.
Not only did my class, none of my class actually went and saw Charlie. I did. My son did. I pulled him out because I wanted him to see. I wanted him, ironically, I wanted him to see how violent the left can be. But I was thinking they're going to pull down his tent, right? I was thinking they're going to
Wow.
throw some banners. I'm sorry, I'm more emotional. I thought I was mostly dealt with it, but I thought
That's
they'd throw some
okay.
banners around. And obviously that's not what happened. So then another person went into a school, went into a church, an LDS church. I'm not LDS, but they went into an LDS church and shot a bunch of people,
Yeah. Last
and set the
weekend in
church on
Michigan.
fire last week. And so I went immediately into my classroom. I promise you, I'm coming full circle here. I went immediately into my classroom. At the beginning of the year, which was just September, I asked them, what triggers you? Go write it on the board. And then I said, we are going to talk about all of these things from the historical perspective. Where did it start? Where did feminism start? And what kind of wave of feminism are we in? How are you going to be able to talk and deal with people who have different opinions with you, rather than thinking that they deserve to be hated, is what I said then. And last week I came in and I said, to die. You got to be at the place where you can have a conversation with people. So I used Peter Boghossian's tactic, where you say, strongly disagree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. And I put those numbers up on the board and I would ask the kids a question. Do you feel more safe when knowing that your teachers are armed? Or would you feel more safe if guns were banned from the property? And they move. And then they talk. And then as they talk, other kids move into their position or stay where they are. And I say, so why did you stay? Why did you move? And I honestly can't get my kids to leave the classroom. It's the last class of the day. We're supposed to be done at 2:30. And 3:45, I'm like, you guys, your parents are waiting outside. Because they're hungry. They're hungry for real conversation. My son does go to public school now because we have an outstanding arts program. And so he goes to school just for that. But he's just like, Mom, the brain rot is fierce here. It's insane. And
Even at
he's
high
like, I'm
school level.
glad. Yeah, right. I'm sorry. I've talked a lot, so go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, so many threads. I just was just clarifying that this is high school level, even, right? That they're
Yes.
at. Wow.
So in rural Utah, and granted it's greatly growing, a ton of people are moving here from blue states. I'm one of them, but a lot of people are moving from blue states to turn Utah blue. In fact, people were holding signs at the Charlie Kirk event with that. I was here when Utah turned blue. Not coincidentally, some of them are the same people who stood up and cheered after it all happened. And the thing is that I mean, I stood up and the very first thing I said was, of course it happened here.
Really?
Of course, because this is the place that mandates kindness. And in your kindness, you believe that it is good to not tolerate the intolerant. And I made this mistake of making a post because my son, after he knew everything was okay, he texted me and I couldn't find him anywhere because he was in the front line. He was getting ready to ask a question. Said to him, or I couldn't find him, my hand was shaking. And I get a text from him that says, "Mom, is everyone okay? If not, I know first aid." And so I made a post about that. And I said, when Charlie Kirk died, leftists cheered. My son asked if he could come back and help. Well, that opened up the world of all the crazies that I had no idea would be so, I don't have another word for it than evil. And I am super technologically not okay. And so I didn't know how to turn off threads. And so for about 48 hours, I just got the most vile, racist things said. And I just thought, these are the same people who don't want free speech. These are the people who think that people should be censored, and they are saying the most vile things. And oftentimes they would say something, and then they would put a dash and say, Charlie Kirk said that. It was it's really sad how brainwashed they are because it all comes across the exact same way. And so what I did, because I had not been a huge Charlie Kirk, I'm in my 40s. Charlie Kirk appeals to slightly older than my son and my son's age, but
Yeah.
he's more of a Tim Pool type person.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't listened to him very much. I've seen little clips. I knew who he was, but I wasn't a huge fan. And so I started listening to all of his, starting with the ones that they said, Charlie Kirk thinks you have the brain the size of the pea. Well, then I listened to what he actually said. Wasn't talking about me.
Yeah.
So he was talking about people who touted that they are where they are because of DEI. They touted it. And that is something very different because I despise DEI. When I was a kid, I had to deal with racism, and I was an actress, and people would say, "Oh, you're very good, but we can't cast you because you are the wrong color." And I did. It's true. I had to work 3 times harder to get cast in a show. But when I did, I knew I earned it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something very significant about that, right? Watching Charlie die was like, this is what I'm trying to teach my students. Are they going to be victims? And the very first thing that happened is a bunch of kids. So the charter school that I used to work at, that I still sub at, and a lot of homeschool groups were saying, how do we stand up for our faith when we could potentially be shot? And so the very first thing that I did was organized a walk for Charlie, specifically for those kids. Let's wear our I Am Charlie t-shirts or have them made, and let's walk back to where it happened. Let's face exactly where it happened, because another thing that we're constantly saying is our kids are resilient while we're watering them down and making them so weak and mentally fragile.
Wow.
So that's,
Wow. That's quite the experience. Thank you for sharing that story. Before we having this conversation, we didn't realize you were there at that event. So I can't even imagine what that was like to experience. It's interesting that you said that because you didn't really watch Charlie, that it's interesting that you went for a purpose to expose what illiberalism against free speech can be, but obviously not in any way expecting to happen what was going to happen. I'm curious just in your reflections in the week since, how it's changed your perspective, if at all, on free speech, the importance of free speech, and or how you're teaching it to your students. And perhaps even if you already have had, I'm sure you have had some conversations about it with your students, in that class, like what if there's just any takeaways from the initial cultural reaction to people who were there and lived it.
Yesterday I was talking to my son and he said, "Mom, we're not in a war." Of course, in his like 17-year-old, "What's wrong with you, Mom? We're not in a war." And and I thought, well, you've just said that the UK is gone. The UK is lost. There's tons of things going on in the UK that are horrific for free speech. And I said, but how did they get there? Because there weren't gunshots. And he said, yeah, they gave up. And I said, so can there be a war without gunshots? Can we be fighting for our nation? And I know that there are people who might call that, nationalism or fascism. Or I said, can we be fighting for our home without there being gunshots? Because that is my everyday experience. Now at Charlie Kirk, before I stood up, and when we all got down on the ground, I thought, is this going to be in my neck or in my back? And will it be fast? And I thought, I did the right thing. I'm going to die on the right side of history, because I have spent the last 5 years refusing to self-censor, and refusing to let other people do it, to the point that there are people who are like, oh, she's crazy. If you talk to her, she's going to talk politics. And I'm like, I'm not even talking politics.
Right.
Look, to me, the person in the office right now won't be in the office in 3 years. What do we have after? What do we have after if our kids have been taught, and they are, the first thing that they were told, the only thing that they were told at my son's school, I am so sorry. Only thing that they were told at my son's school was, one teacher said, yeah, I used to be political, and then I realized it's just not worth it. We can let other people handle that. It was extremely upsetting to me, because you are telling people they don't have a responsibility to protect their home. So yeah, talking to the kids, I am I have this background behind me. I made a video and I called it I Am Charlie. And I just said, not everybody gets to say that, because there's a ton of people who have willingly censored themselves and continue to do it. One of the most frustrating things to me are the people who have been advocating for silence and for censorship in Utah, got up and went to the Capitol and had a press conference about how we're all the same. And it was just like, we're not. You're authoritarian. I believe you have a right to say even the ugliest things. In fact, I want you to say the ugliest things, because it gives me proof that it's happening. And then when there were people who would say filthy things, and if they didn't swear in their filthy things, I print it off and I take it to my class and I say, here's what is happening. And I'm trying as hard as I can to not be super, to not show my hand.
Right.
But I was there. And so,
Yeah.
and I'm grateful that other than my son, the kids will go, well, where do you stand on this, Mrs. B? What do you think? And so right now, what we finished, and they asked to continue this lesson,
Mm-hmm.
we finished with what had to happen in order for the Jews to be willing to give up their guns in the Holocaust. And now we're going to Beto O'Rourke's list of what he wants, and it's surprisingly similar. His gun control list is surprisingly similar to the reasons that they took the guns then.
Yeah. Well, for whatever it's worth, I don't think there's not, in the wake of events like Charlie Kirk's assassination, and certainly I think the mainstream horror at the celebrations to his killing, I think the political coalition for tighter gun restrictions is not very strong in this country right now. I think that's another consequence, frankly, of even as we call it, the year of ultimate chaos and illiberalism of 2020 that we all lived through as well. So, but events like Charlie Kirk's assassination are also, they're apocalyptic events in both directions, because they can silence a lot of people when they see that that can happen to someone who's just having conversations like he was, right? So this, I think that's why standing up and speaking out and not self-censoring becomes even more important in the aftermath of an attack like that, because in so many ways it is, and it's not just symbolism, it's reality that the assassination of Charlie was an attack on anyone who values free speech and who wants to use it to engage with other people. I mean, I can't think of a more heinous and literal attack on speaking freely than shooting someone in the neck who was just doing that. And I think,
especially when it came to, I mean, they could have done this somewhere else, but instead they did it where there were so many young people.
yeah,
And that was the whole thing, is that the young people were in shock as they were fleeing. And then I got over to local McDonald's, and some of them said, he's the only person who spoke to us. I think they knew exactly, you know.
oh yeah, no, he was targeted for sure, and the message was sent. And so I'm just, as both a leader for free speech, someone who doesn't self-censor, who can say confidently and proudly, I am Charlie Kirk, and the teacher then of the youth, what are you telling them in the aftermath of his killing? Is there anything you can say, or that maybe that they're saying, that is encouraging you, that they're not going to be dissuaded
Well,
from speaking their minds?
what I think after hearing those kids is that parents, especially if you still have kids in the house, you have to be that person for your kids. Your kids shouldn't be forced to look outside to find somebody who will talk to them about hard things. So there's that.
Mm,
I also tell my kids that the first place that you are enslaved is in your mind. So if you self-censor under the name of somebody else's version of kindness, and that kindness means that you have to put yourself in a place of being dishonest to yourself, you will lose your desire for truth. There's a study that has shown that if people swallow a lie or repeat a lie, even for just about 2 months, they will lose any desire for truth. Well, we did that for, we did that for 2 years, right? I mean, not we, but many society, the West did that for 2 years.
yeah.
So a lot of people have lost their appetite for truth. And I just tell the kids that there's nothing more important than that. And I try to make it, it doesn't matter what you say in this class. You get to say it.
Yeah,
You
I love
just,
that.
yeah.
And do you find, so many questions. Do you find though that I assume your student group is diverse intellectually, ideologically, politically, right? So that there's a healthy and
Mostly, I mean, the
robust debate.
homeschool world is what you think. Well, especially in rural Utah, the homeschool world is what you think. Except intellectually, I have been surprised. I
Okay,
thought I was raising, you know, like a prodigy. And then I get into this classroom. And wow, they will give you a run for your money. They are
okay,
very smart.
that's
There's a
good.
few who are like, it's interesting because the girls first were like, well, I don't understand why we need to care about politics. And I said, well, I think you'll find out. But I said politics is more than left or right, and it's definitely more than Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It's a whole lot more than that.
Right.
But your culture and what you're allowed to do, that comes down to whether or not you are a moral and educated person.
And truth seeking. Yeah.
Very much, yes. And I definitely make it very clear that there's a difference. So the very first lesson that I teach my kids is I reenact Russia. And I teach them that I teach them how fast it was to make kids change their minds about God. And what they would do is they would say, pray to God and ask him for candy. Oh, children, there's no candy here. Pray to Uncle Stalin and ask him for candy. And then you close your eyes and then you put the candy out on the table. And I said,
Wow.
every person has an agenda. Every single person. No teacher comes into a classroom without an agenda. My agenda is to get you to think for yourselves and to be comfortable saying what you have to say.
Yeah. Wow. Which is, I think, the ultimate agenda that we would hope all educators go in with, but we know, unfortunately, that's not the point in the culture where we're at. So, certainly thank and applaud your efforts to introduce the opposite. I'm wondering, just kind of as we wrap up here, if how would you say being witness to Charlie's murder has changed you on the issue of philosophical liberal values and the fight for free speech, and or if it's changed at all your approach to teaching your students about thinking critically? I know it's still very recent and raw, but if you have had any thoughts around either of those two questions, your own personal approach and or how you teach your students to think critically about these issues.
What I'm watching in the aftermath is a lot of people coming in and saying they're going to be the next Charlie, like manufactured, oh, this is our next Charlie Kirk. And the thing about Charlie that he had that is the thing that I will pick up my cross. I am a Christian and I will pick up my cross. I will not, like, if this is the hill that I literally die on, then this is the hill that I will die on. And I'll just tell you, afterwards, the night of, I gathered the moms that I work with because I'm the state director of Moms for America. And I gathered the moms and I said, who's in, who's out? Because nobody's going to blame you if you're afraid of doing this work. But we need strong people who are going to stand and who aren't going to water down the message and are going to just keep going. And I said, not only do we need that as an organization, but the younger generation must see it. So, and my moms all were saying, I'm more in than ever.
Wow.
Even the ones who didn't show up were saying, I'm more. And some of them didn't show up because they had a gut feeling something bad was going to happen. And they still are saying, I'm more in than ever. Because we have a choice, and our choice is so simple, and it's a paraphrase of, I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees.
Yeah.
And that's 100% where we are. In our midterms, if the insane drama kids gain power again, they're not the things that they tweet, they mean.
Yeah,
So
we keep seeing more
stand
examples
up
of
and
that.
fight, because you don't want to live a coward.
We keep seeing more examples
Sorry.
of that, I think, daily, even from people seeking elected office across the country, of just the normalization of kind of violence and violent rhetoric, liberalism, and
Yes.
and this equating words with violence, kind of false equivalence, which really becomes just a rationalization for treating violence as just another form of speech.
Yes. It's always projection.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your story and experience. I guess just you did a great job, but we always like to just end by letting our guests, if they have any other words of encouragement or advice for particularly young people, but really people across the age spectrum who are who value these values, but have a hard time standing up and speaking out for them. What would you say to them to find that courage to speak up and stand up?
There is an image, and I cannot verify if it's true or not, but the image shows an iron mask that goes on slaves to stop them from being able to think. You are constantly told that slavery is the biggest sin that America has ever had, that it is the thing that needs to be dismantled. Its history needs to be dismantled. We're not dismantling its history when we stop thinking for ourselves. When you think for yourself and understand where things logically conclude, you have to speak. That is, I understand that there may be atheists here, but I believe that that is your God-given right. As a human being, you get to speak. If you speak articulately and if you speak with purpose, people will listen. And I think the big thing is that you have to do it to give other people the courage to do it, because it's so scary. That's the fact.
Yeah.
It is scary to leave my house and to say, today I will speak truth to power, regardless of what comes. That's what you've got to do.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I once saw or read a good background on kind of that confidence follows the commitment to courage, and
Yes.
that really just begins with it. So it's, people I think often miss a kind of understand or miscycle the cause and effect relationship. They think you need confidence in order to do that, but this author kind of reframed it in the opposite. Said confidence is really the outcome or byproduct of just committing to stand for truth, and then to muster the courage to go outside of your comfort zone, try something new. I mean, this applies, I think, in all contexts of life, not just politics or having public speaking or just having a voice here. So, but I think it applies here too, is that even like you said, as long as you're thinking for yourself, and if you know that something is true in your mind, that's the commitment enough you need to then speak out for it. So, let's hope that example and the example you're setting and encouraging your students to set is one that we all can follow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your time. As always, you can find us every 2 weeks at Free Speech Forward under the ILV Dissidents podcast channel. You can always find that on their website, ilvalues.org, or our 1776forward.com. We'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks, Carob.
Thanks.